what I learned professionally during my week in China, visiting 26 tech companies, 6 days. What I learned there absolutely changed the way that I look at all kinds of things.
I've been there since 1989. I lived there for 5 years. I understand it well. And I've just watched that country come from nothing to an amazing organization, amazing country within 35 years. The changes, massive changes they've made, how they've reformed their society, how they've become an engineering society is absolutely mind-boggling.
China, they're graduating 1.5 million engineers a year, maybe 400,000 engineering degrees here in the United States versus 1.5 million in China. They are an engineering-driven economy.
They've just achieved a lot of things within their society that give them an economic advantage over almost any other country.
It's driving a lot of the innovation into physical AI, things like humanoid robots, quadrupeds, some of the ASRS systems that we saw. And so they are innovating like crazy.
By 2050, we're going to have 50 billion robots in the United States. Lots of humanoid robots over time. I believe within 3 to 5 years, you're going to start to see them show up inside of manufacturing. Number one, everybody's got to be willing to learn. And, we've got to foster that within Ashley Furniture as well as within the educational system and in society in general. And then we've got to make it actionable. This is up to us to learn this and then create an action plan around it within our business so we can deploy it. And I think at no other time in history that I've ever looked at is there such an opportunity. And I'm super excited about it now. You are too. Obviously, in the United States, we have to catch up, and we're all getting motivated and getting fired up because we can compete and we must compete. And we got to change our shoulds to musts. Like with education, we can no longer say we should do these things. We must do them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And to your point, it's on us. So if you're listening to this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast, it's not about waiting for somebody to do something. It's up to every American to figure this out in every single aspect of our economy.
A leader's job is to see things before others see it. You've got to be curious and you got to learn and you got to see things before others see it and then take action.
I share your optimism for the future, Todd. We can lead on these technologies. There's tremendous value and tremendous benefits that we have here in the United States. I wouldn't trade places with anybody in China for anything in the world. But to your point, we can learn from them and we can innovate here just as quickly, if not more quickly. And it isn't a question of whether we do it. There isn't an option. Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. It is your host, Matt Kirchner. I have talked a number of times on this podcast already here in 2025, how I took a trip in August of this year that was one of the most transformative weeks of my entire life. And I'm not just saying that. In terms of what I learned professionally during my week in China, visiting 26 tech companies, 6 days full of visits, 7 in the morning till 10:30 at night most of these days. What I learned there absolutely changed the way that I look at all kinds of things. I was on that trip, compliments of a great friend of mine, by the name of Todd Wanek. Todd, as many know, is the Chief Executive Officer of Ashley Furniture Industries. It's his third appearance on the Tech Ed Podcast, as a matter of fact. We're going to have some fun breaking down that trip to China, talking about the incredible transformation that's taking place across the Pacific Ocean and what that means for us here in the United States of America. Todd, it's such a pleasure to have you back. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure being here.
And you know this, I'm so grateful for that time that we spent together in China. And, you and I were together back in March, and you were talking about what you're seeing over there. I kind of made a little offhanded comment that said, well, if you're ever going and you have some room, let me know. And lo and behold, a couple weeks later, I got a text from my friend Todd Wanek, and not long after that, we were off on our way to China. So thank you so much for that experience and what it's done for us, for our companies, for, what's going on with the Tech Ed Podcast, for our audience. I can't thank you enough for that experience.
Well, I really enjoyed the time too, Matt. It was incredible just sharing. We were on a bus together, which was actually probably the best part.
Right.
And just talking and brainstorming the whole time and go see somebody and we talk and brainstorm and talk and brainstorm. I think you came away with 70 pages of notes. I came away with a comparable number of notes, pages of notes. It was just absolutely incredible. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you bet. And I've gone back time and time again to that, and it's informed so much of strategy in different businesses and different initiatives that we're involved with. So I know we're going to get into this, and I want to let our audience know we came up with a really creative idea. Actually, Todd and I did together when we were on that trip for how this episode is going to run. We both came up with 5 questions that flowed out of our recent trip to China, and Todd's actually been there once since then. And so I have 5 questions for Todd Todd has 5 questions for me. We traded questions in advance. I've got them all right here. So the way we're going to do it is that I will ask one of Todd's questions that he's asking of me. I'll respond to it and then give Todd an opportunity to expound on my answer. Then we'll go on to one of my questions for Todd, and we'll do it in exactly the reverse order. So this is going to be a really, really fun episode. Why not dive right into it? Todd's first question for me, the first of 5, is why is China more effective in their efforts to modernize their economy than is the United States of America? I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And some of the examples for this, I mean, just to put this into perspective, right now, the United States has one nuclear reactor under construction, and it's going to cost $30 billion. During that same period of time, actually, August of 2024, China approved 11 new nuclear reactors in China, and they are going to build all 11 for what it costs us to build one here in the United States. That's just one example of the incredible innovation that's taking place and how quickly they're modernizing it. I think there's a number of reasons for that. If we sit here in the United States and even looking over the course of the last, call it 60 or 80 days, and you see, and I don't know if dysfunction is the perfect word, but you just see how hard it is in some cases at the national level to get things done here in the United States. China has exactly the opposite situation. All their decisions are made at the national level. Here in the United States, where we are graduating, I think, 36,000 lawyers a year. In China, they're graduating 1.5 million engineers a year. And even if we look at engineers to engineers, maybe 400,000 engineering degrees here in the United States versus 1.5 million in China. They are an engineering-driven economy. Here in the United States, 51% of our senators, 51 out of 100, are attorneys, 30% of the House of Representatives, attorneys. In China, Chairman Xi's entire Politburo, all engineers. They're systems thinkers, and they understand how to build things. They understand how to get things done. They're the benefit of central planning. Say what you want about communism, and I'm certainly no fan. There is something to be said for being able to centrally plan everything and systematically build and innovate the way that they are. And I think that's a big contributor. Todd, what would you add to that?
I would agree. I think that, the centralized control is absolutely one of the biggest things that they've achieved. They run it like a business. And, when we look at we're debating and we're arguing, they're looking at it and they're running it like a business. And I think that's an incredible approach. I love their 5-year plans. I've been following their 5-year plan. They're in their 14th 5-year plan right now. And there's a lot of innovations that have happened. If you go back and you track them and you look at the progression of achievements that they've accomplished on each one of those plans, it's amazing. They became an engineering society. They became a technology society. They reformed their education. All those things were done primarily because of their centralized control. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages of it.
Correct.
The one advantage is speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. Yeah, the advantage of speed and scale, I think, is the other one. I mean, just the scale at which they're doing things, and we could come up with example after example. Anything you would add to that? I know you're fascinated by some of the dual circulation, the green transition, common prosperity, and so on.
Yeah, and I think you and I have kind of exchanged some videos that are going on right now. The tallest bridge has been built in China, some of the other engineering feats that they've accomplished. I just look at the technological self-reliance that they have, and they're really focused on that and building their own computer chips and rare earth minerals and things like that. They've just achieved a lot of things within their society that give them an economic advantage over almost any other country.
And it's all intentional and it's all planned, and they execute incredibly well as well. Once they come up with that plan, they have a way of getting things done. So agreed on that. I know we're going to get into some of the rare earth minerals and some of the other aspects of their economy and how they're creating simultaneously kind of protectionism and an export economy as well. We'll do that in a bit. I want to move on and make sure that we're getting to all of our questions. My first question for Todd was this. One of the things that I learned that I didn't know beforehand was this whole idea of coding and programming here in the United States versus in China. And here, all of our code, all of our computer code, all of our AI algorithms, they're all locked down, right? If a company like Meta, for example, is creating their next amazing algorithm, it's not like they're going out and sharing that with the world. China is exactly the opposite. I mean, literally, when they come up with new code, when they come up with new algorithms, when they program a new function into hardware, that's on GitHub within a month or two. There's literally no IP, no intellectual property in China when it comes to at least public code and code that's taking place in their private companies. Contrast those a little bit, Todd. The closed source versus the open source. What are the advantages and disadvantages, and what do you like about each?
Well, I think closed source helps a company. In the U.S., we're really focused on capitalism and increasing value of companies, and I think that's a big part of the closed source system is the fact that they're trying to protect themselves. In China, it's very open source, so an open source allows them to do an accumulation over time and cumulative learning. And I saw that happen actually from August. I just got back a couple weeks ago from China to November. The speed of change within that period of time was absolutely mind blowing. And it happened because of open source. I saw different humanoid robotics. I saw different actuators. All those things were happening because it's an open source collective system. And I was just absolutely blown away with what was happening because they're all improving. And once one, I think you and I talked about with the humanoid robot, once one learns how to walk, they all learn how to walk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just amazing how fast progress is being achieved because of that.
And I think there's a couple things that I would add to that. I agree 100%. And I think you started by talking about the benefits of capitalism, and there certainly are lots of benefits of capitalism, and many of us have enjoyed those benefits for a variety of reasons. I'm saying this is almost like an existential test of which model is better, right? Open source and the Chinese model, or closed source and kind of profit driven. Here in the United States, we're able to recruit the best and brightest talent because we can pay these engineers, AI engineers, tremendous amounts of money because there's a profit motive on the other end of that model. And so it's really a question of, is it that model or is it the one where they're all innovating together? I think the other thing I would add to your answer, Todd, which was quite eloquent, is what it's driving in China, because there isn't any intellectual IP advantage to your coding or your programming or your algorithms. It's driving a lot of the innovation into physical AI, things like humanoid robots, quadrupeds, some of the ASRS systems that we saw. And so they are innovating like crazy. We're going to talk about humanoids a little bit later in the episode, but innovating like crazy on the physical AI front. And so that's been really, really fascinating, really, really fascinating to watch. So we're on to question number 2, and I'm watching our time closely. I have to manage all this into 60 minutes, and I promise that we will do that. But Todd's question to me, this is his second question, is how has China reformed their educational system to meet the needs of industry and foster innovation? And I would say I would start with kind of where we started with that first question, which is the whole idea of centralized planning. There's a very centralized approach to education in China. And Todd and I are both manufacturing guys. In fact, the first time he was on the podcast, we talked all about manufacturing, standardization, doing things in one plant the same way you do things at another plant. There's some disadvantages to that in education, but lots of advantages in terms of your ability to scale and your ability to innovate once and then spread that across an entire country. So part of just the central planning side of things is a huge contrast, and they've reformed that way. They're very highly competitive. The students there are all, for those that are college bound, are all competing to perform on a really, really high stakes college entrance exam. And so what that's driven is a lot of understanding of standardized education, standards-based education, teaching students in a way that they will excel when they get to that entrance exam. Really, really important. So those are some things that are interesting. I know we're going to talk in a while about K-12 AI education being mandatory in K-12, which I think is something that we have to move toward here in the United States. And then back to this whole idea of engineers, 140,000 engineers a year here in the United States, 1.5 million in China, 50,000 graduate degrees in engineering here, and 400,000 in China. And so many of these engineers are graduating in areas like AI and semiconductors and medical devices. And we'll talk about metallurgical engineering in a little bit. So they've got this whole, Todd talks about the 5-year plan. They decide, what are we going to accomplish in the next 5 years? What kind of talent do we need for that? And then how do we align our education system from one end of the country to the other to create the talent that we're going to need to be successful? So in a lot of ways, that's quite a bit different than what we do in here in the United States. So agree or disagree on that one, Todd?
I totally agree. I think that their top-down educational system is absolutely working well for them. I've heard this argument over time, and I know you have too, about the creativity and the fact that their system stymies the creativity of the human being. And I'm just not seeing that. Everybody talks about that as one of the big issues. There's no question to a certain degree it probably is because of free speech and other things that may impact them over time, especially when you start talking about AI. But overall, I believe their educational approach is absolutely massive and going to lead them to the next phase because they're all about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And they're really getting deep into that and really getting deep into that whole concept around how do we develop the next generation of engineers within our economy.
And I think a lot of that is driven by, Xi surrounding himself. So he's an engineer, he's a chemical engineer. He's surrounded by engineers. I think at one point in the last few years, all 9 members of the Politburo, so his like senior advisors were all engineers. So they've created this engineering environment and huge believers in engineering and the ability to build and driving that into STEM education. The other thing that just an observation I made on a recent podcast, Todd, just the incredible, the speed of innovation, which you've already mentioned, but the enthusiasm on the part of the people working in those companies. I mean, we walked into one AI company in Shenzhen and humanoid robot company together at 7:30 at night, and it was as busy as you would see an American engineering company at 2 in the afternoon. I mean, it was just, these people are working 24/7, working to innovate, and a lot of that is because they've trained the engineers that are able to do that.
There's also an integration of education with business. And we saw that at the university level where they're integrating together and they're working together. The universities are working with businesses on their problems and trying to solve problems. I think that's also another key element.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things, every single company that we visited had an education strategy, right? So here in the US, I mean, Ashley Furniture, as our audience well knows, has been incredibly supportive of STEM education, but we don't see that in every company here in the US, and every single company in China had an education strategy. So another really important distinction, and I think good advice for manufacturers and individuals across the private economy here in the United States. You ready for question number 2 from me? All
Sure.
right. So, um, we had a big conversation about the cost of automating, and if you don't tell the story, I'll tell it in my response. But a couple of meetings where we were talking with some of these automation companies, and for our audience's benefit, part of the visit was to see what we call ASRS companies, or automated storage and retrieval systems. So big inventory management systems, like you might see it like an Amazon here in the United States, but automated systems for manufacturing inventory, for monitoring and for controlling inventory and for managing inventory. Met with a lot of those folks and a lot of other automation companies. When we talked to some of these companies, Todd, they drew a distinction between what it costs to automate in China and what it would cost us to use the same automation coming from China here in the United States. So we'd love for you to reflect on what we learned there.
Yeah. Well, number one, a lot of people, I just brought this last group of 35 people with me in earlier in the month. And one of the things that they thought I was doing was bringing them over to understand cheap technology. How
Mm-hmm.
do you get cheap technology and reduce the cost of automation? And once the last day I was summarizing with them, they said, we thought this is what cheap technology. We realized that this is more innovative than anything we have in the United States, or as
Mm-hmm.
innovative.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just about inexpensive. It was about the quality of product that was there. And I want to make sure that's understood, that this isn't like just cheap robotic arms. This is about a good quality product that's durable, well made, and very well done overall. And it's a fraction of the cost of the United States. As a matter of fact, we saw robotic arms are 20 to 30% of the cost of what it costs the United States to do. And when you and I were in that meeting, we were pushing that individual and saying, why is that price that price? And he
Mm-hmm.
said, well, in the US, your cost of labor is so much higher. So you can justify a higher expense of equipment. And you and I looked at each other and was like, you got to be kidding me. So if I buy a piece of equipment for Vietnam, it'll be cheaper than what it is in China, and China's cheaper than the US. He goes, yeah, that's the way it works.
Right.
Because you could justify something in a year or 2 years, and your cost of labor is $50,000, let's say, per person. So you can afford to pay $100,000 for a robotic arm. In Vietnam, you only pay $5,000 a person, so you can only pay $10,000 for a robotic arm. I'm like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
But my big fear with this whole process is, number one, the technology is it is world-class. Whether it's robotic arms, whether it's humanoid robots, whether it's ASRS systems, all those things are what I'd call world-class technology. My big fear is if we end up overpaying in the United States, that makes us less competitive.
Right.
And, I believe that China is such a manufacturing powerhouse right now. They're going to control a big part of the global market. And to compete in the United States, we have to get inexpensive automation to be able to compete.
And that was the first reflection that I had on that question, Todd. It was exactly yours. It had no relation to the direct cost or even the burden cost of manufacturing the product. It was all about what is the cost of the next best alternative, which seemed, I get it, right? I mean, you charge as much as you can. Somebody's willing to pay for your product, but that surprised me a little bit. I won't say which company, but we were meeting with one of those companies, and we were talking about automating, what it costs to automate in China with an ASRS system. And we said, what about the United States? And literally the guy that was the the senior leader of the company like laughed at us. Like he was like, "Oh, we wouldn't sell this in the U.S." And I was like, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, number one, the cost of steel in the U.S. is way higher, and then on top of that, you've got the tariffs that are layered on top of that." And I've got mixed feelings, as you know, about tariff strategy, and I think they make sense in certain circumstances and not in others. But one of the meetings that I've had at the highest levels of the U.S. government is exactly around that, which is, look, we can't burden and tie the hands of our manufacturers here in the United States with automation technology that costs, in this case, 4 times more to do it here in the U.S. than it would cost to do it in Asia. We've got to find ways to get low cost or at least reasonably cost automation technology in front of our manufacturers here. And I know those last two were things that surprised you as well.
Yeah. And on my last trip, I went to BYD and went to BYD's auto factory, and I was the most automated facility I've ever seen in my life. AMRs are moving materials around. The assembly lines are fully automated. It was absolutely fantastic to see that. It was all well orchestrated. But, just the cost of doing that there versus here, you're probably talking about 5 times more to do it in the United States. And it's very hard to justify automating a factory or a distribution center with that kind of expense. So my big concern is, you talk about tariffs. We got to be very tariff friendly as far as manufacturing and bring things in that we can't make here and make it affordable so we can automate our companies and automate our businesses.
Absolutely. That's the future of manufacturing. And without that technology, and I see it firsthand, right? I mean, it's not a question of replacing labor with robots. It's a question of being able to produce it all, because we can't find, in many cases, the people that we need to do things cost effectively here on the manufacturing side. So anything we do from a national policy standpoint that sets our manufacturers back, those are things that we as a country have to look at really closely and make sure that we're making good decisions. I'm all about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. I'm a huge believer in U.S. manufacturing, but the only way we do that is that we allow our manufacturers here in the U.S. to have access to the tools they need to automate their processes and continue to drive into the age of what we used to call Industry 4.0. And I think we're now even beyond that. Okay, we are now to question number 3. Yes, question number 3, which is my third question, or Todd's third question for me, I should say, and then he'll respond to it. What is their approach to clusters as they relate to automation, AI, e-commerce, and educational clusters, and why are clusters important? So let me put this into perspective. And this was one of the most just seminal moments of this entire trip. We visited, there's a e-commerce cluster, what they call an e-commerce cluster in Shenzhen. It was, I'm going to get it really close to perfect, maybe not perfect, 3 buildings. By my recollection, every one of those buildings was at least 70 stories tall. So, 3 huge buildings in Shenzhen, China. And just, this is one of 25 e-commerce clusters. So think about that. 3 70-story buildings, that is just one of 25 clusters like it. And when we say clusters, these were filled with e-commerce companies, over 1,000 companies in those buildings. They said 100,000 people working in those buildings. That seemed like a lot, but easily tens and tens and tens of thousands of people working there. 100,000 square feet of office space. So think about that. And they are full of people, and they are absolutely, I'll just say it, they're absolutely gaming, literally and figuratively, the e-commerce market here in the United States. And the way that they are managing what shows up, whether you're on Amazon, Temu, Alibaba, Wayfair, whatever marketplace you're on, they've got this dialed into an absolute science to when you go onto Amazon and order whatever it is, new furniture, a new pair of socks, whatever, there is somebody on the other side of that knew exactly that you were looking for that and knew exactly how to get you to their specific product. So that's what's happening in these e-commerce clusters. Now, I asked a question of one of the gentlemen that was running one of the companies. I said, how do you train all these people, all these merchandise managers? And to kind of tee up the answer, inside these clusters, there's all kinds of companies, beauty products companies, there's furniture companies, there's fashion companies, apparel companies, appliances, toys, anything that you can think of. They're selling all these products into the U.S. marketplaces and elsewhere. And a lot of these companies are competitive, right? You could have, dozens of furniture companies or dozens of apparel companies in that e-commerce cluster. They all use the same people to train. They have a centralized training function at the e-commerce cluster. All of their photography can be centralized. All their marketing is centralized. Their access to capital in a lot of cases is centralized. There's their access to meeting spaces for large and important meetings. All that is centralized, even among competing companies. So you start to think about how these companies have, through these clusters, driven out all the excess cost of having all of that as one company, all those shared services, and then really focusing themselves on whatever their highest and best use is. It's a really, really fascinating model, just across e-commerce and leveraging AI like crazy. I mean, there was one case where we saw one of the companies that was literally using an AI agent to go to their competitors' marketplaces and scrape all the data from their competitors' marketplaces. At the exact same time they were scraping that data, they were using that to help inform how they were going to present their products as for price or as to how they would present them on the marketplaces, and simultaneously burning their competitors' ad spend because they were visiting their marketplaces and lowering their conversion rate. Fewer people were buying the products because it was just a bot that was going out to do this. So, I mean, Todd, that was absolutely fascinating to me. That's the approach to clusters that I saw in China. What would you add?
Yeah, I would add it was very effective. Clusters are one of the things that build economies. I've been part of clusters in the United States, in Mississippi, for example, North Carolina for furniture clusters where you have everything around it. You have raw materials, you have cardboard, you have particle board, you have suppliers that are supporting you. In the case of upholstery, you have foam. So clusters are probably one of the most effective things that a lot of people strive for. China was a big manufacturing cluster for years, even for furniture as well as other products, and they still are. But I would say that the e-commerce cluster is probably one of the most effective things I've seen because of the collaboration that's happening. And they're collaborating, they're finding ways to get better. And when somebody finds one way to get better, they teach everybody else. And that's kind of that whole concept that we talked about earlier. The collective raises, and then they all get better and faster and better and faster. And they are definitely gaining a major advantage of the marketplace by being able to do that, because nowhere in the US have I ever seen what I'll call an e-commerce cluster like that. And they're doing about 70% of the business on Amazon Marketplace, the Chinese resellers are. And it doesn't mean it's product just from China. It could be product from the United States. It could be product from Vietnam or other parts of the world. And they're just super effective in how they approach it.
And they have DCs, distribution centers located here in the United States. And just, I know this is probably going to beg a lot of questions. Where's the product coming from? Some of these e-commerce companies own their own manufacturing. Some of them don't, and they're outsourcing that. And not all those manufacturers are from China either, right? I mean, they literally have the ability. In fact, one of the questions that we asked is, how are you responding to U.S. tariff policy? And their answer was, well, if a tariff lands on one of the countries where we're producing this product, we'll just move the production to a country that has a different tariff relationship with the U.S. I mean, they're literally moving production around based upon what we're doing with our tariff policy, which I thought was really, really fascinating as well. Agree?
Yeah. And I would say that it's probably one of the most capitalistic environments I've ever seen.
Totally.
And, we talk
Yes.
about communism versus capitalism. That was as capitalistic as I've ever seen, going around, because you and I went to several companies within those three buildings, and we visited them. It was like, oh my gosh, they're all learning, they're all competing. They're working very, very hard. They still operate basically on a 996 schedule, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. So we just saw the pace of energy and the pace of work within those companies be super high and very effective.
9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And I think another example that I shared on an earlier podcast, we were, so it's 2:30 in the afternoon. I'll start with that. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, and we were at a company that bills itself as the Chat GPT of China. And we were spending some time with their AI engineers and some of the other folks there, and then had occasion to kind of walk back through where all of their AI scientists, their data scientists, their programmers, their coders were all working, and there were cots lining the wall. So the first sign is, oh my goodness, I mean, these people are sleeping at work when they have to. I mean, how many people sleep at work in the US anymore? And by the way, it was 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. So it was like, when look, I've worked around manufacturing technology in general here in the United States. I know there's places like Silicon Valley and Research Triangle and Austin where you've got these really hard driving tech companies where people are working at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday. I don't see that very often. And then the other thing I'll throw in there is just, you mentioned the whole spirit of capitalism, the cap tables of some of these companies, and a lot of them were really open to it with us about how they had capitalized their businesses. And I figured that the answer would be they're 90% owned by the Communist Party, and maybe the entrepreneur owns 10%. I mean, their capital models are really similar to the ones we see in U.S. I mean, venture capital, they've got private venture capital that's coming into these businesses. They have public venture capital, so Chinese venture capital that's coming into these businesses. And actually, it surprised me, a lot of cases, American venture capital that is coming into those businesses, which I'm like, wow, that really, really shocked me. And then asked a couple questions about, at least in my brain, and there were so many paradigms that were blown up over the course of that trip in my head. But, I was like, okay, so you got this entrepreneur and, this individual owns 5% of this company or whatever. I mean, the Chinese government is taking most of this and they're probably just, working their hands to the bones in these small companies and never getting anywhere. A lot of these people are worth tens of millions of dollars. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. The same as in the U.S. That just shocked me. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment. Very capitalistic driven. And most of those companies are looking to go public over time, very similar to the US. And they're trying to figure out how they capitalize their company. The other thing I would say that's really interesting is they didn't have limited beliefs around what they sell. We talked a lot about that. They just looked at total addressable market. What's the size total addressable market? Okay, I need to get into kids' toy cars. I need to get into trash cans or whatever it was. They didn't have limited beliefs on what they sell, and they were opening up third-party logistics in the United States. They'd pop that product into a U.S. warehouse. They sold it on Amazon. They'd ship it directly to the consumer.
And, to add to that, the way that I think about even in some of our businesses, if somebody starts creeping into your space, right, with a product and it's similar to the product that you have, like that to us is like, at least to me, is a huge competitive threat. Like, okay, that's, you got to take that personally. I mean, they were just like, if somebody came up with a product similar to one that they would just in 3 months innovate into some new space. And they didn't even, nobody got upset about it. Nobody got angry about it. It's just like, okay, well then, they changed. No, we have to change. And it was just kind of that conversation. I know you remember we were at the top floor of one of those buildings having a conversation with one of those e-commerce companies. And I was just like, oh my goodness, they don't even worry about it. They just move on to the next thing. Kind of on the same topic of e-commerce, Todd, we were at this company that has really figured out how to get into the social media feeds of US consumers. And when I say that, I'm talking about TikTok, I'm talking about YouTube Shorts. And, I spend less time on TikTok than I used to. I kind of got off of it about a year, but I'm on YouTube Shorts, which works the same way. You flip through video after video. And I'm like, I know there's an algorithm running in the background that's kind of showing me a product every once in a while. I kind of figured that was random. Meanwhile, there's this company in China that's like totally hacked into the open source, not even hacked in, but open source code on TikTok, totally understands how to put whatever product they want to in front of us based upon our activity on that social media platform, which is equal parts fascinating and scary. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, that was a huge eye opener. And as you know, we've actually changed course in a few businesses as a result of what I learned on that part of the trip.
I think traditional marketing as we know it is dead. And not dead yet, but it's dying. And we're going to see it die fairly quick. I mean, we obviously saw television die, newspapers die. I'm not saying they're completely gone, but they're definitely, they don't have the same level of impact they had at one point in time. We're now moving towards an interest-based economy. And a lot of conversation around what's an interest-based economy. Well, that's getting into your social feeds.
Mm-hmm.
To market, you're no longer going to be able to market to somebody the traditional way, where they go to your website, and you're doing Google, for example, because people are going to have agentic AI over the next couple of years. As they get agentic, obviously the agent's going to be serving a lot of content to them. They're no longer going to be searching the way they have traditionally searched. So you've got to figure out where the customer is and go to them and market to them in their social feeds. And this company that we visited had an absolutely amazing approach in how they're doing it. They could create a video in seconds and launch it. As a matter of fact, one company that they represented created 19,000 videos a month and did $15 million of revenue off those 19,000 videos. Now imagine that's an amazing amount of content that you put out there. And they did it through TikTok, because TikTok is the number one channel there. They do about $300 billion of business in China. In the US, they do about 10 billion. So just unbelievable capability that's being put in place, and the ability to just basically get in the airwaves. And it's not the same video being served over and over again. Once the content's generated, they create more content off the content. And they look at who's clicking in, how many clicks they get, and they regenerate again and regenerate again. And they're learning along the way. So just unbelievable how interest-based economies are going to evolve and how marketing is going to evolve.
And it was all in real time. I mean, to your point, I think one of the things I think they shared was that, you could take 10 videos. So like if I had our, biz dev team in one of our companies make 10 different personalized videos, and they could chop that up into 1,000 different videos that the social media platforms would not recognize as the same content because it was in a different order with their, different aspects of what it was they were showing. And it just absolutely fascinated me. The other conversation we had, you mentioned agentic AI, and our audience knows our definition for that is just a virtual or a digital employee. But we're going to get to a point where, if I'm using my AI agent, or I'm in ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or Meta or, whatever platform I'm using, and there's people that are already doing this, you can have that platform go and do your shopping for you, right? And then you've got the company on the other side of it. So a consumer goods company, for example, that is marketing using agentic AI and the kind of platforms that we're talking about here and more. It isn't going to be long before we literally we're going to be making purchasing decisions based upon my AI agent talking to your AI agent and figuring out what's best for me, taking the consumer decision almost all the way out of the mix, which is just, and that, I mean, that's not like 20 years from now. I think that's 2 or 3 years from now, maybe even sooner than that.
We just launched on Perplexity, and
Oh,
we're
did you?
launching on ChatGPT in the next 30 days. So we're pretty excited about that. We'll see how it goes. It's going to be a learning process for us to try to feel our way around and feel the walls. But ultimately, our team's super engaged, and we're excited about those platforms.
I feel a fourth episode of the podcast coming up a year from now to talk about, what we've learned about agents selling to agents, because I think that's going to be really fascinating to watch. We're doing a little bit of that kind of work as in our businesses as well. So super, super exciting. Moving on to our fourth questions. So Todd's question for Matt: what is China's attitude towards U.S. reliance on China and exports to non-U.S. companies? And I would say, and this all kind of goes back to their 5-year plans, to summarize it in a sentence, they want to make us more and more reliant on them. They want to be less and less reliant on us. There are a number of different strategies that they're utilizing to do that. We'll talk about rare earth minerals here in a little bit, but certainly in that space, I mean, you look at their ability to mine and refine and process rare earth minerals. We're in a lot of ways really dependent on China for our rare earth minerals, to the point where we can't support our needs or come anywhere close at this point in time here in the United States. And so what they're doing is they're building into their own economy. They want to be as self-reliant as possible. So whether it's chips, whether it's rare earths, whether it's technology, manufacturing, technological know-how, engineering talent, I mean, they are building all of that inside of their country. And they're doing that for a number of reasons. Part of it's economic and trade. A lot of it is to be able to control technology and advance technology and then decide who gets access to what technologies. And a lot of it is just surviving economic and geopolitical threats. So, the less reliant they are in the rest of the world, the more that they can survive an economic threat. And certainly the more that they can defend themselves if they ever need to, from a national defense standpoint. So there's a lot of logic that's going on to that. To the question about non-U.S. companies, they're building incredible partnerships with Southeast Asian nations, Africa, the European Union, Latin America, and doing all kinds of things in terms of creating options for their economies so that they're less reliant on us as a consumer, so that if for whatever reason we've got federal trade policy that is discouraging the acquisition of Chinese products, they're creating other markets for their products so that they can continue to enjoy the benefits of those exports. So it's not happening by accident. It's all centrally planned. It's all very, very intentional. But they don't want to cut off trade with the United States, but they want to put themselves in a position where they're not reliant on any other country in terms of their own national security and their economic prosperity.
And I'm watching them export to the world. I have a chance to travel all over the world. I'm in the Middle East, South America, Central America, and I just see the product showing up in droves. I don't see American-made cars in Central America and South America as much as I did before. The dominance is down. Same thing in the Middle East. You start looking at what's happening in the Middle East, whether it's BYD vehicles and other products coming from China. They're world-class, and they're going after it very hard, and they're building a complete supply chain to support it. I think the risks that we have in the United States, if we don't figure out how to get more manufacturing here, more automation, affordable automation, is we're not going to be exporting anything. We already export little out of the country compared to what we consume. But if we don't have a good, solid export engine, that makes us vulnerable over time. And I see China taking over a lot of the global economies. And nothing wrong with that. They've had a strategy to be able to do it. But the U.S. needs to get in a position where we can compete against them, and we can export our products throughout the world as well.
Yeah, you've mentioned BYD a couple of times. That's Build Your Dreams. So it's the Chinese automotive company. Turn the clock back to 1990. There were 500,000 automobiles in all of China. So in 1990, I was just about ready to graduate from college. 500,000 automobiles. Today, there are 435 million cars in China. I mean, think about that growth over that period of time. And, you and I remember being in a shopping center after lunch, and their auto dealerships are right in their shopping centers, right? So you can have lunch at, Maggiano's or their version of it, and then walk across the hall, and there's the automotive dealership. And just marveling at, the technology. I mean, these cars were as nice as any mid-level Lexus, Mercedes-Benz. I mean, really, really nice, Tesla. But the prices, I mean, a $35,000 car. And so to your point, I mean, if we're going to compete from an export standpoint, there's no way that we can do that unless we find every way possible to lower the cost of manufacturing here in the United States of America to continue to enjoy that export market. I don't blame China either for trying to do what they're doing, but lots and lots of opportunity for us to, I don't want to say mirror that, but at least to build on the leverage that we have, and in those areas, whether it's technology or other areas where we still have a competitive edge, to be able to manufacture and export here from the United States.
Yeah, and I want to go back to that cluster conversation because we've lost the clusters in the United States. And what President Trump is trying to do is rebuild it, rebuild some of this technology and capability, silicon chips, whatever it happens to be. How do you rebuild manufacturing prowess? Because if we don't have the cluster established, in other words, all the raw materials and components that go into building a product, it gets very hard to be competitive. And that's what we have to rebuild in the United States right now, is get ourselves in a position to be able to do it. And if we could do that, stand up a base and bring the cost of automation down inside companies, we can then turn back into an export engine. I believe, and I think you and I have talked about this before, I believe we've lost the battle on exports, but we got to win the war. And to win the war, we got to reinvest back in the United States, reinvest back in our capability, but do it very smart and do it in a way where we're keeping our companies competitive. We're not raising their costs so they're uncompetitive.
Exactly. That's exactly what we need to do. And there's so many different ways, whether it's automation, whether it's lean, driving cost out of manufacturing operations, standardization, collaborating on creating talent. I mean, if, that's a rising tide lifts all ships, all those kind of things that we can be doing collaboratively as clusters in different market spaces, I think really, really important. I know Ashley in a lot of ways is leading the charge on that, but excited to see what the next several years bring there. You think about some of these technologies we talked about, U.S. manufacturing from the technology side, U.S. manufacturing from the durable goods side. Same things happening in China. The thing that I see happening in China that I've seen a lot less of in the United States is just some of these really crazy, quickly innovating tech companies. And I want to talk a little bit about humanoid robots because we visited probably 7 or 8 companies that had some form of humanoid robot technology, all applications across the board, everything from something that would greet you at a store and welcome you into the store to robots that were, making coffee, to robots that were built for manufacturing and distribution centers. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that realm. I want to hear a little bit about what you've seen in the innovation just since we were there to now. But talk about humanoid robots. Are we that far away from having humanoid robots actually working in manufacturing operations here in the United States?
No, we're not that far away. Humanoid robot technology is really evolving pretty quick. And, again, for my last trip, a 3-month period of time, we saw a dramatic shift and change in the capability of these humanoids. They've got dexterity in their hands, and there's companies just specialize on dexterity in hands, and they're advancing. Now, you could take a look at what Tesla's doing too. There's 1X Robotics, there's Tesla, there's Figure in the United States. There's a lot of people that are running after this prize because the belief is by 2050, we're going to have 50 billion robots in the United States. I've heard those numbers, right, wrong.
Right. That's Elon, yeah.
Lots of humanoid robots over time. I believe within 3 to 5 years, you're going to start to see them show up inside of manufacturing. Right now, they're building capability. We've seen them deployed in specific cases, where they're just basically picking and placing. But over time, as they become more intelligent with open source AI and the artificial intelligence gets within the humanoid, it's going to be able to do tasks. And the one thing about a humanoid that's different is it learns by doing. And if you look at what we do today with robotic arms, we have to spend a lot of time programming to get it set up and make sure it knows a pick and place. As you start getting vision and you start getting artificial intelligence, it can learn by doing. So it's easier to deploy them. And I think that's going to happen within 3 to 5 years. We'll begin seeing them and begin seeing them in manufacturing. And then after that, it'll obviously explode.
Absolutely. And we've got a podcast, I think, teed up for the first quarter with 1X. So looking forward to that, what they're doing in the humanoid robot space, really, really fascinating. I've showed some videos and, we're now putting the podcast out on YouTube so people can go back and look at that. We'll ask Melissa to link a couple of those up in the show notes. But these humanoid robots, you knock them over, they stand back up. They can sit down in a chair. They can stand up, from a chair. The big question is, in fact, I was having a conversation. I won't use his name specifically because I actually disagreed with him in the conversation, but a New York Times #1 best-selling author, and I were having a conversation not too long ago. And he said, well, yeah, the humanoid robots can't do a backflip. Do you know the backflip test? And I was having that conversation a day later with a friend of mine who's the CEO of Waukesha County Technical College, Rich Barnhouse. And I said, yeah, so-and-so said, the technology isn't right there. We can't use them in manufacturing because they can't do a backflip. And Rich said, well, I can't do a backflip, but I can work in manufacturing. Like, that's pretty
Some of
good.
the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So where that technology is going, and I think there's all kinds of technologies that are playing into that biomimicry, what we're doing in materials, what we're doing with AI, what we're doing with vision systems, what we're doing with telemetry, with battery power. A lot of what we're learning in the EV space and that BYD is innovating in. These are all things that are kind of colliding and really creating some fascinating developments in the whole world of robotics and automation. And so we've got our eyes really, really closely on humanoid robotics. I think there's going to be, there's like 60 companies that are innovating in that space right now. I think you're probably going to see 2 or 3 winners. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up kind of rising to the top there. But it's going to be a fascinating time, and other technologies as well. We saw quadrupods. Any of those other technologies that occur to you that we saw while we were traveling through China that our audience should be aware of?
No, I would say that those are the big ones. And one of the interesting things is, they've got the room service robots that move around
Yep.
hotels. Every hotel I'm in overseas now, specifically in China, they have the room service robots where, they're IoT'd into the elevator. They want to the floor 14. They go to the door, rings the doorbell. It's absolutely amazing. It's got a little heater inside of it. So when you pull it out, the food's warm. But that's being deployed very fast too.
Absolutely. In fact, that was one of the funny moments from our trip. I remember getting on the elevator the first night that we were in Shenzhen, and there was a robot on the elevator when I got on. I was like, "Hey, dude!" And then and literally you like ride the elevator with this robot that's taking room service to somebody's room. It was really fascinating. I would throw onto that. I remember our first day in Shenzhen, walked outside, and somebody pointed up, and there were like 10 drones hovering over the top of us, and they're all just delivering packages around Shenzhen. So they're now, we talk about when, is the day coming when Amazon will deliver a package to your front door using a drone. I mean, that's alive and well, certainly in certain cities in China. So that was really, really interesting as well.
And in the U.S., Walmart's doing it in Texas. So,
Are they?
it is coming here as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, and think about all the costs that drives out of the supply chain. I mean, when you can just drop a product at somebody's front door. So that's an exciting one to keep our eyes on as well. So now we are through 4 questions each, and we're moving on to question number 5. Todd's question for me, number 5, was discuss rare earth minerals, why China will retain an advantage in mining over the long term, and the failure of U.S. education to understand this critical need. So let's, a great question, by the way. And, it is going to be a while if we're ever going to regain dominance in that area. It's going to be a while before it happens. But I'll share a couple of thoughts, and then looking forward to your thoughts as well, Todd. First of all, I've got a good friend in the form of a guy named Tim Sullivan. Tim was the chief executive officer of Bucyrus. And maybe fewer people know Bucyrus now. It's been a while since they were sold to Caterpillar in 2011, but an iconic company in the mining equipment space. Tim was the CEO of that company when they sold to Caterpillar for $8.6 billion, I think was the number. So this is a big time company and a big time guy in the mining space. Tim and I were chatting not too long ago, and I said, this whole rare earth minerals thing, I mean, they're mining those in China. China's going to places like Africa to mine them as well. Do we have that in the U.S.? He said, hands down. He said, we absolutely have all the rare earth minerals we need here in the United States. It's just that because of some of the permitting policy and environmental challenges, we haven't been able to mine them. So I think that's the first point to be made, at least according to the guy that ran the largest mining company in the world. We've got abundance of rare earth minerals here in the United States. It's not just a question of mining them. We also have to refine them and process them and so on. But that's the first point to be made. A second point to be made is on the refining side. So it takes 5 years to build one of these facilities here in the United States. So if we decide today, and there's some going up now, actually, I think it's a great investment opportunity here in the U.S. as an aside. But if we start today, 4 to 5 years before we have the capacity to be able to do the refining of the rare earth minerals, and that assumes that the permitting and some of the environmental requirements go smoothly. If they don't, it can take a lot longer than that. And then the third part is, so it's number one, we have them here. Number two, it is expensive and time consuming and difficult to get the refining capacity built here in the United States. And then it's all about the talent. So there's a couple interesting things. A couple weeks ago, Todd, as you know, I had occasion to travel to Washington, D.C., spent some time with my friend, Secretary Doug Burgum, who's the Secretary of the Interior. And he has said publicly, if you look at the United States, we graduated, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, 36,000 lawyers here in the United States every single year. And you know how many metallurgical and mining engineers we graduate every year? It's 300. So think about that. 36,000 lawyers. One of our biggest challenges is rare earth minerals. We're graduating 300 metallurgical and mining engineers every year. And if you look at kind of this is not Doug Burgum anymore. This is actually Jim Rankin, who was, at the time, was the president of the South Dakota School of Mines. If you look at the four disciplines that are really important there in rare earth minerals, mining, so mining engineering, metallurgical engineering, geological engineering, and geology. There are only 4 universities in the entire United States of America that teach those 4 disciplines. And so if we're going to ever lead on this, we've got to figure this out. One of the things that I'm really excited about and we're spending a lot of time thinking about is how do we take this idea of getting students excited about manufacturing careers that we've been really, really successful with in a lot of ways, long ways to go, but making a lot of progress, and do the same thing for mining and metallurgy, because without those disciplines here in the United States, we're going to have a really, really hard time when it comes to competing with technology. Your thoughts?
It's interesting you brought that up because after we left you in Hangzhou, Shanghai area, we took the bullet train down to a factory in the center part of China. And as I got off this bullet train, there's a bus, and they picked me up at the bus because they're taking this factory. They had 13,000 furniture manufacturing facilities in this area. And we drove past this beautiful school. And I asked the person I was with, it was actually the mayor of the city. And I said, tell me, what do they do in that school? It's a mining school. And I said, it's a mining
Really?
school, really? He goes, yeah. I said, how many kids are in that school? 35,000 kids. I said, 35,000 kids in this mining school? He goes, yeah. And I said, how many schools like this exist in China? He said, about 3. So think of it. They got 100,000 kids going through mining schools, getting mining degrees every single year. Not every single year, but 25,000 a year roughly are
Right.
graduating. And then I said, what else do they do? They teach them African languages. They teach them, Portuguese for Brazil. They teach them all these languages, and then they deploy them. And they send them all over the world to be able to help get the rare earth minerals, because that's the one thing China's after. And I was just blown away. And as a matter of fact, I was on ChatGPT on my phone as we're driving around. I'm like, how many kids in the United States graduate with mining degrees? It was 300.
Yep. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
But
Yeah.
it's absolutely one of the disadvantages I think we have. So we talk about rare earth minerals, it's not about refinery, but it's also about the people in the educational system. We got to reform that to be able to get people interested in these trades.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm assuming that ChatGPT got that from the Tech Ed podcast, actually.
Probably.
So that's probably the source of the information. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. And so really putting a ton of thought here into how we get more young people excited about that. Got a few things going behind the scenes, believe it or not, on that front. So we'll see what kind of fruit that bears. But if we are going to be competitive here in the United States, when it comes to technology, we have to get access to these rare earth minerals, and we have them here in the United States. We have to have a strategy around extracting them, doing it environmentally responsibly. I get that part of it, and super, super important, but there's ways of doing that, but having access to them and then building the infrastructure to be able to process them. And I know that's a huge priority for the current administration.
And the beauty of what the United States, where we both live, is we are a resource-rich country.
Exactly.
We've got abundant resources in the United States. It's the ability to be able to do something with those resources.
Yep, exactly right, which is all about national policy, and it is a little bit of a contrast between central planning and picking a direction and going, and flipping back and forth every 2 to 4 years, which we could do a whole podcast about that. But if there's one lesson or one message to the folks at the highest levels of the U.S. government, it's like, let's get coordinated on this. Let's recognize that these things that we're talking about, whether it's AI, whether it's education, whether it's rare earth minerals, let's agree where we can agree and get going on our national strategy. And I know there's things in the works already, but super, super important. One of those things I just mentioned was education, which brings me to my final question for Todd Wanek on our list of 5. And that question is, contrast China's strategy to make artificial intelligence education mandatory in schools versus the approach of the United States being hesitant toward AI adoption or overly focused on chatbots. So, we touched on this in education. And I just want to, before you answer that question, Todd, to remind members of our audience that maybe aren't as understanding of the incredible work that Ashley Furniture is doing, that the Ashley Furniture Education Foundation is doing, that the Ron and Joyce Wanek Foundation are doing to drive this forward. And this is something that your company at the highest levels of leadership recognized a long time ago and has really had a very focused strategy, which continues to expand on how do we create that next generation of talent. In many cases, you've created the roadmap for how others can do this. And that's why I wanted to finish on this question is as we think about AI education being mandatory in China, we think about some of the things you're doing, particularly with our good friend Mike Bigley at the Whitehall School District and surrounding districts to get kids excited about these kinds of technologies. Talk about their strategy versus our strategy and what we should be doing.
Yeah. Well, number one, Mike Bigley was on this trip with us, so we got a lot of insight into AI and education. That was absolutely fantastic to have him on that trip. Because he's so insightful and so observant. But China mandated AI in their schools. It's not debated. It's not argued about. It's mandated. So when they say this is the direction we're going to go, they go. And everybody gets in line and they reform the curriculum and they change their whole educational system. So they mandated it because they know it's where the future's going. And I think that is a massive strategic advantage that they have compared to the United States. You mentioned earlier the number of AI people that are graduated from school or engineers that are graduated from school. It's unbelievable compared to the United States. We're not bringing kids out of school with AI education. There's a couple schools like Whitehall School Districts, which doing a great job. Alpha schools in the United States are doing a great job, but it's not getting a groundswell of activity yet, and it needs to. Because it is a massive disadvantage. If we bring the kids through school with the traditional methods of education from the industrial era that we had in the United States, we don't reform our education to be AI based, I believe we're going to be at a massive strategic disadvantage. We already are. We've got to catch up. And we've got to reform our school systems, use these tools, not fight with the tools. I read a lot about, teachers saying that they can't use AI in the classroom. It's like, that's exactly the wrong approach. You've 100%. Got to embrace it and use it. And the ability to basically customize education for kids through AI is probably the biggest strategic advantage I see, Matt.
Yeah, there's no question about it. You think about everything that we know about a student. I wouldn't even go through the laundry list, but somebody can make it on their own. You think about what a school district, what a school knows about their students, everything about them, and being able to use that to customize delivery methods to meet that student exactly where they are and make this as efficient as possible. We can do all that with artificial intelligence, certainly teaching the use of generative AI. And you and I agree 100%. We shouldn't be prohibiting that. We should find ways to integrate it into education and then allow and encourage our educators to be more creative in terms of what that classroom experience looks like. And if we need to morph the experience and be more hands-on at school, more project-based, reflecting more on what we've learned rather than just regurgitating something out of a textbook, then let's innovate. And then the final part of that, and this is a key area among others where Mike Bigley, who's been a former guest on the podcast, by the way, we'll link that episode up. He was on within the last 6-8 months, I think. Great episode where Mike Bigley has been a leader in others is this whole idea of applied AI and physical AI. How much of the artificial intelligence that Todd and I talked about today is related to, generative artificial intelligence algorithms and programming, and how much of it is related to drones and humanoid robots and quadrupeds and electric vehicles and all these ways that we're, autonomous vehicles, all these ways that we're deploying artificial intelligence on the edge. That's where it's at. Mike, in association with a quick plug for the folks at Discover AI, because they've actually created a way to expand that with Ashley's encouragement beyond the Whitehall School District into districts all over the country now. Super, super exciting with that endeavor as well. We'll put that in the show notes. But if we don't get this right, and it's really, Todd, at every level, right? I mean, let's start out with, we've got to get kids excited about this in K-12. We have to drive AI learning and applied AI learning all the way through their K-12 journey. We have to be teaching it at our technical and community colleges in terms of how it applies to a wide range of discipline, not just manufacturing, but healthcare, hospitality, public safety, every single aspect of our technical and community colleges at the university level. We talked about the huge disparity in terms of the number of engineers we're graduating versus other parts of the world, especially China. We've got to get that right. And then in the workplace, and we've got to get our manufacturers and other companies understanding the value of e-commerce, the importance of clusters, the importance of automation, of making automation affordable, of deploying it at scale. I mean, if we get it from one end to the other, we get this right in the United States, that, there's still a lot of hope. I haven't given up by any stretch. I think if anything, what I saw in China opened my eyes to what we could be doing here, but we've got to get on our game and drive it forward. I'll give you the last comments here before we close up shop.
Yeah, and I think the number one thing that we need, certainly in my business, is I've got to get everybody. I have to get a groundswell of activity, and I need willingness of the people. Number one, everybody's got to be willing to learn. And, we've got to foster that within Ashley Furniture as well as within the educational system and in society in general. We got to get people that are willing to embrace these technologies and these ideas. And then we got to make it actionable. We've got to take things and we've got to make them so you can take action on it and you can actually deploy it. Because everybody kind of expects an angel from heaven to come down and help them, right?
Not how it works.
This,
right?
This isn't an angel from heaven. This is up to us to learn this and then create an action plan around it within our business so we can deploy it. And then we have to have capacity to be able to do it. Capacity within our business, within ourselves, and within our time. And I think at no other time in history that I've ever looked at is there such an opportunity. And I'm super excited about it. I know you are too. This whole China conversation, they're very efficient, and you got to give them a lot of credit for what they've done. I've been there since 1989. I lived there for 5 years. I understand it well, and I've just watched that country come from nothing to an amazing organization, amazing country within 35 years. And the changes, massive changes they've made, how they've reformed their society, how they've become an engineering society, is absolutely mind-boggling. So lots of credit to China. Obviously, in the United States, we have to catch up, and we've got to make sure that we're burning the ships, so to speak, and we're all getting motivated and get fired up because we can compete, and we must compete. We got to change our shoulds to musts. Like with education, we can no longer say we should do these things. We must do them. And I think that's an imperative that we all need to agree to.
And I agree 100%. And to your point, it's on us. So if you're listening to this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast, it's not about waiting for somebody to do something. It's up to every American to figure this out in every single aspect of our economy. I share your optimism for the future, Todd. And I think we can lead on these technologies. I think there's tremendous value and tremendous benefits that we have here in the United States. I wouldn't trade places with anybody in China for anything in the world. I'm not pretending that I would. But to your point, we can learn from them and we can innovate here just as quickly, if not more quickly. And it isn't a question of whether we do it. There isn't an option. And I'm really, really proud to be on this journey with you. You're a brilliant business person. You're brilliant when it comes to technology, to geopolitics, and most important, how all of these pieces fit together. So I always learn a ton from Todd Wanek. You're a great man and a great friend. Really appreciate you spending time with us here on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Matt, just one more closing comment. Our jobs is to see things before others see it. A leader's job is to see things before others see it. And, to go and see and to study. Breakneck's a good book that you sent me from Dan Lane. If anybody wants to learn more, I'd highly encourage them to do it. I just got it a couple of days ago. So here it is. It's Breakneck.
Yep.
And,
awesome.
Great book. I'd highly recommend it. And again, you've got to be curious and you got to learn and you got to see things before others see it and then take action on it.
Breakneck will be linked up in the show notes as well for the podcast. Great book. And for anybody that wants to get a sense for everything that Todd's talking about, how quickly China is innovating and what it means for the United States and the rest of the world, that's a great book to pick up. Todd, I feel like we could sit and talk about this all night. I know you're a busy gentleman. I've kept you more than an hour, but thank you so much for being with us on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. We're going to put all of our show notes we'll call it techedpodcast.com/Wanek2. Let's do that because I know Wanek is already taken. So we'll call it WANEK2. So that's techedpodcast.com/Wanek2. And that's where you'll find all of the show notes, all the great things we talked about here on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. When you're done, check us out on social media. We know China will. We know they're doing that. So we might as well check us out on social media as well. We are on TikTok. We are on Instagram. You'll find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on Facebook. Pretty much wherever you're checking out your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. When you do, stop by, say hello. We would love to see you. We would love to hear from you, I should say, and we would love to see you next week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, my name is Matt Kirchner. Thanks for being with us.